We have a jam-packed meeting for you all today. Because of that, I'd love for us to get going. I thank you to all of you who were able to join us right on time. I understand in this COVID kind of Zoom meeting environment, often people are moving from one space to the next. And so some of our additional Historic Albina Advisory members will be joining us shortly, but I'd like to get started. Next slide, please, Ms. Natalie. I want to recap for you today. We have a very, very exciting meeting with some committee updates. We also have an update from the independent cover assessment team. I'm also pleased to have with you, with us today, Grace Cronican and some of the panel members from the peer review of the environmental assessment to give us some updates and some insight into their findings. Also pleased to have with us Vice Chair Orlando Simpson. Then we'll have a discussion in regards to a little bit of the baseline explained for you. So we have a baseline that we're all working from in regards to the EA. And then we'll have a conversation with Ms. Jessica in regards to the project brand identity. So I'm excited about that as well. Next slide, please, Ms. Natalie. You all are pros at this. You understand that we want to hear from you. Your voice matters. Speak your truth. Make sure you're listening for understanding. Oftentimes we'll have some conflict, so expect to have a little discomfort. Deal with the issues and not the people. We want you to remain respectfully engaged. So those on the Historic Albina Advisory Board and who have speaking parts, please keep your camera on when possible. And we did not get to this point overnight, so we cannot solve everything today in this meeting. We expect and accept non-closure today. Next slide. I'm going to do just a bit of a shift because I know we have some time constraints with Vice Chair. And so I would love to jump quickly to our Program Director, Ms. Megan Channel, who will give some introductions here.
Sure, and good afternoon, Historic Albina Advisory Board. Before I jump into my project updates, I do want to turn it over to our OTC Vice Chair, Orlando Simpson, who is joining us for the beginning of our meeting this morning, just to give some remarks. So Vice Chair Simpson, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Megan. And first of all, thank you everybody for committing your time to this interesting process that you are going through, which, I mean, interesting to the extent that, you know, there's a lot of wounds here as it pertains to what has happened to this community historically and ongoingly. But I do believe that there is a very important group of leaders and individuals in all different disciplines that are working collectively to ensure that what happens as a result of this project actually can foster a model for how you actually build community going forward and how that really impacts and restores some of the historical injustices and wrongs that impacted a particular group. Portland is not the only place where highways have scarred the fabric of the community. It's happened all over the entire country. I mean, it happens all over the world if you talk about it in today's standards. But I do believe that, you know, things are starting to change little by little. And as we know, or I would say our ops manager and my facility operation always says, you know, we don't eat the elephant all at once. It's just one bite at a time. And so I think if we keep that in the back of our minds, knowing that change comes with baby steps, and every little single matters, we won't have to worry about the home runs. And so to just be adamant and optimistic about where we're going and trust the process. And I think that kind of applies to most things in life. But I just wanted to kind of say a couple of things as it pertains to where things are at today. At our last meeting, we had an update on the work of the independent highway cover. And there's a lot of community feedback during that first round of workshops. And for the ICA team, really the role that they've been brought on to really assist the agency with was, generating up to 3 feasible engineering and architectural options. In one of our previous ESC meetings, I raised this question to the group because we can come up with all kind of pretty pictures and designs, but the real question is, what can we do within the boundaries that we actually have? And I think sometimes when people aren't fully privy to who controls what jurisdiction, who owns what, who does that. I mean, we have a city where ODOT owns a highway, we have a city that owns the streets, and then we have a county that owns a bridge, all within like 1 mile radius. So think about when you talk about transportation, how complicated that can get when you have 3 different public agencies with 3 different policy structures working together to achieve something. And I think trying to set those boundaries and getting people to understand what swimming lanes everybody's functioning in, it makes it easier to try to think through what you can and can't do as you're working through community engagement processes. So I would just highly encourage folks that, we obviously want to focus on the community and the economic needs for this particular area, but the one thing we have to be cognizant on is keeping in mind that we do have boundaries. There's a specific footprint that has been defined under our environmental assessment approval that was issued through the federal government, and we must work within those boundaries. ODOT doesn't do housing, ODOT doesn't do schools, ODOT doesn't do a lot of the ancillary things, small business incubation. I guess you can say they have a mentor protege program through contracting and things of that nature, and they administer the disadvantaged business enterprise program through the federal government. But outside of that, there's not a lot of things that ODOT can do. I think ODOT can be a great convener and partner with a lot of other public agencies that oversee a lot of other things pertaining to urban planning, housing, and city street infrastructures and utility systems and things of that nature that are necessary to build a community. But there's only one particular role that ODOT plays in this whole conversation. And I'm just humbled to be a part of ODOT taking a leadership role, being vulnerable, being honest about what it has done historically and what it plans to do to try to create a different paradigm on how it invests in communities. And I think that says a lot about an agency that's gone through a lot over the past couple of years. And I know it firsthand because I've been a part of it. I've spent my whole 30s on ODOT, which I don't know if that's gonna cause me trauma and harm as I get older or not, but I'm hoping it doesn't. I'm hoping things like these can actually showcase as to why we actually become public servants and why we try to change systems in order to make them better for our future generations. So I just want to encourage, everybody here to understand that at the commission level for ODOT, we are definitely pushing. It's a 5,000 person agency, so as much as we wanted to change overnight, that's not realistic and that's not practical. It's going to take time. And for folks to just be patient with that time and be patient that, folks that are leading these efforts within the Urban Mobility Office and within Region 1, they are starting to come along with this new direction and this new ethos and this new culture that is being instilled through the agency by our leader, Chris Strickler, who I was a very big fan of going through the hiring process after Matt Garrett retired from ODOT after 10 years, which he was the longest standing director in the United States at that time. And I think ever for that matter, as far as I know to date. But I wanted to say those things so you guys can actually know from me, honest and vulnerable and just transparent that, this is how I feel, this is how I think about the process. Today's presentation will give us, a lot stronger understanding of that baseline footprint, which I think is the main emphasis that I want folks to kind of keep in mind. And understanding that baseline will help this group evaluate the feasibility of that cover design so that we can start working towards reconnecting this community and thinking about bigger opportunities like the group that's working on a more of an economic development strategy referred to as Albina Vision Trust as it pertains to urban planning efforts. And so whatever role the department can play in that effort to try to help streamline and help assist foster through a bigger economic development strategy, such as one that is really large and aspirational like Albina Vision Trust, I think we're all fans and supportive of. With that, I just want to, again, thank you all for your time, for your energy, for your sacrifice, and your public commitment to this effort. We want to make sure that we work obviously within those boundaries, but to me personally, as everything has happened, I don't think it's necessary that we try to delay a project to force it to go through another environmental rigorous review when we have an opportunity right in front of us. And somebody can go verify this, but as the team has been designated right now within the construction partnership on this project, there is an estimated $100 million that is going to go back into the hands of a Black-owned construction firm, period. Now, why is that important? It's because it is one of the largest, if not the largest, contract ever issued to a Black-owned civil engineering firm, not on the West Coast, but in our entire country. That is transformational. And when you think about the amount of money that goes back into the community in the form of jobs and opportunities and economic development, and people being able to buy homes and build wealth and change the paradigm in which we're actually even talking about homes being taken from people. This is the bigger conversation we have to focus on. And I'm really adamant that we're going down this path. I think we're going to do it the right way. I'm optimistic we're going to do it the right way. We can't do it the right way without stakeholders such as yourselves and the other folks that have been involved in this entire process. But personally, delaying a process like this with that kind of opportunity on the table, which is transformational, wouldn't be the most logical thing for us to do, especially in a moment when everybody seems to believe Black Lives Matter. I'm a big advocate for Black economic prosperity matters, because economic prosperity leads to independence. And so the only way we can actually restore an independent and rebuild Black community, you have to be able to provide opportunities to economic independence. And so I believe that the construction opportunity right here will be a great catalyst to that. And I encourage you guys all to continue to challenge the agency, push the agency, demand the agency do things outside the box and different, but to always keep in mind that there's boundaries in which you work through outcomes to try to get to positive solutions. And so in this case, we unfortunately have a boundary. Unless people believe it doesn't make sense to put $100 million into the Black community as fast as possible. If people don't believe that, then sure, I understand. I don't believe that because I think our community needs it the most since it's been here the longest in this country, yet it still is in last place economically on the totem pole. So again, I'm sorry for the vomit session and the rant and the soapbox, but I appreciate everybody's time commitment to this again, and I'm available if anybody wants to reach out and talk in any more depth about what my thoughts and ideas are as the chair of the ESC or as a commissioner of the OTC as it relates to this project going forward. So Megan, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And adding on to that, I really appreciate those comments. And, you know, we as an agency under your leadership remain committed to centering the voices of the Black community as we move this project forward in partnership specifically with each of you as our historic Albina Advisory Board members. So thank you for trusting us to show up to this space, and thank you for holding us accountable as we partner together moving forward. Erica, do you want me to, oh, please go ahead.
I just wanted to apologize to the group as well, because I'm going to be leaving, and that's why I said feel free to reach out to me anytime. I have a group of young kids that I work with at the Salvation Army because I'm trying to work on something over there as well. But thank you for allowing me the time to share my thoughts and comments, and I'll turn it back over to you guys. Thanks.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Vice Chair Simpson. We just appreciate you being here with us tonight, and we understand your commitment. You're all over the community, so we respect that. Have a good evening with your kids. I just would love to, Megan, thank you so much. I realize we're a little bit off of our agenda, but I appreciate your patience and your flexibility. I'm going to get to everything. We're going to get to the public comment. So quickly, what I'd like to do is, Megan, if you would chime in and give us an update on the community, the COAC, forgive me, I just lost in my memory.
I've got you.
Oversight Advisory Committee. Yes. Thank you so much,
Indeed.
Megan.
Indeed. So on behalf of Janelle Bell, who is the facilitator of the Community Oversight Advisory Committee, just want to make sure that you as the HAAB are updated on what that group is doing. So at their meeting last month, there was a strong focus on the diversity plan that is being prepared by our CMGC partners in coordination with Raymore Construction. And so the focus for their last meeting was really on an initial section of the diversity plan and the DBE component, and we'll be continuing to work with the COAC members over the coming months as we work in tandem in partnership with our CMGC team in finalizing that diversity plan. And we'll be getting to future topics around subcontracting and workforce opportunities in those coming meetings. So I'd say it's a start of the process. We're very early in the development of the diversity plan, and so more is to come. And as COAC comments continue to be developed in coordination with CMGC, we'll make sure that the HAAB is apprised of the details of that diversity plan moving forward. So with that, I will pause on the COAC update.
I appreciate that. And just because he's in the meeting with us, Janelle, if you had any comment or just wanted to address the group, I wanted to make sure to acknowledge you this evening.
Thank you, Erica, and good afternoon or evening, HAAB. I think that covers it in terms of what Megan updated. So that covers it.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to move quickly. Dr. Holt, if you would give us an update on the Executive Steering Committee.
Absolutely. If we could go to that slide, that'd be great. But you just heard from Orlando Simpson, who is the chair of the Executive Steering Committee, and he's the vice chair of the Oregon Transportation Commission. And he gave a very high-level overview of what we covered in our last meeting with the Executive Steering Committee. You can see it on your screen. The project updates were the I-5 mainline design overview, and we talked extensively around the air quality recap. And then there was a brief moment for the Portland Public Schools to give an update, and they will be on the agenda for the upcoming Executive Steering Committee to talk about Tubman. So it would be great if members of the HAAB would like to listen in. We're asking that Portland Public Schools kind of give us the strategy with what they're planning related to that space. There are several Executive Steering Committee members who have asked and inquired in regard to that. And then ICA gave us the recap around work session number 1, as they did with you, and then the preview for work session number 2. I want to spend a few moments just to talk about, though, the intent, and you kind of heard the heartbeat of Chair Simpson. Part of the intent of the work for the Executive Steering Committee is to coordinate efforts with the Historic Albina Advisory Board. We think it would be extremely valuable to spend some time together and think through the work around the covers, and to have conversation and dialogue and come to a place of leveraged agreement around kind of the feedback and determinations. As you know, the recommendation from the HAAB comes to the Executive Steering Committee, and then the Executive Steering Committee makes a recommendation to the OTC. So be expecting some communication in regard to coordinating a time to meet so that we can think about how to process together what we're working on as a collective. The hope and the goal is to make this a collective strategy and a partnership. So that's my update for the ESC.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holt. Again, I understand that this is a little off schedule, but Natalie, if you could move back to public comment, I'd love to give the opportunity for those from the community who have joined us this evening to let their voices be heard tonight. So Miss Natalie, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Erica. I am just sharing this screen right now with information on how to dial in and make a public comment. This information is also below the YouTube video if you're joining us through the live stream. I'll go ahead and stop sharing right now and invite Mira to share her on-screen timer. for the public comment. And I'm looking for any raised hands. I do see one hand raised right now. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and provide your public comment just as soon as we get the timer up on the screen. Are we able to get that? One moment, please.
You're trying to connect with people, trying to get the most response with you. So one of the key things to remember when you're beginning to write.
Okay, that should be showing. And I'll be, hopefully everybody can see the on-screen timer. Phone number ending in 8577. Please make your comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm a plaintiff on that lawsuit you all probably read about yesterday. We filed a complaint because we caught ODOT lying to the public about the air pollution this expansion will bring to the backyard of Tubman Middle School and the Albina neighborhood. And in a few minutes here, they're going to repeat these sleights of hand to you. 2 years ago, ODOT deliberately put their fingers on the scale to manipulate the freeway expansion's traffic data. That's the only way ODOT could find peer review consultants who could make the claim this would be the first freeway expansion in history to lower nearby air pollution. Any claims that this expansion will be positive for air pollution is based on this faulty data. It's not the peer reviewer's fault, it's ODOT's. You should ask the peer review consultants if they've reviewed ODOT's traffic data. We have proof ODOT cooked the books, but it's a little too complicated for 1-minute testimony. But every single one of you on this committee is empowered to ask ODOT's facilitators to let No More Freeways speak at the next meeting for longer than 1 minute. Even just 15 minutes. Surely ODOT, trying to empower you, would let you invite me to speak for 15 minutes. What does ODOT have to hide? If ODOT says no, you can email me directly at info@nomorefreewayspdx.com. And in closing, I'll encourage you to review the written testimony submitted by Joe Courtwright ahead of this meeting, which shows maps of exactly what ODOT is proposing in the backyard of Tubman. And I'll encourage you to
and we need to move on, so I will thank you for your comment. I'm looking for any other comments, and I'm not seeing any other raised hands. A reminder, at the bottom of your YouTube live stream, you can see the information for how to dial in. And I'll just give it another moment, and then we can move on. And seeing none.
Thank you, Ms. Natalie. Aaron, thank you so much for your public comment, and you're always very thoughtful. I want to remind all of us in the virtual space, this is a meeting that is open to the public. It is not a public meeting. And so we want to give some space for those who have an opportunity or would like to share. But there are several ways for you to communicate your thoughts and for you to provide comments to this Historic Albina Advisory Board for review. If you would look on the i5rosequarter.org website, there is a email there. There's also a phone number that you can make sure that your voice is heard and that the board has an opportunity to hear your comment. All right, Natalie, if you would share the slides, I would like to move back and introduce Ms. Gina Woolley and the Independent Cover Assessment Team, and they have some updates for you all as well.
Well, basically, thank you, Erica, and good evening to all of the HAAB members. I'm here. I've been graciously allotted some time on this very busy agenda, which our team is grateful for. But I'm here really to solicit your help. Could we go to the next slide? To solicit your assistance in basically getting more Black community participation in our next online open house. So each work session that we do involves basically, and the upcoming work session next week is the second work session. And each work session involves 2 community workshops, and it involves a 2-week online open house, a meeting with you, with your body, which is really a mini workshop, and a mini workshop with ESC. Could we go to the next slide? So one of the things that you may recall, you've seen this report out a couple of meetings back about workshop 1. We had, we reached out to actually this 100 community organizations was more like 150. We just completed all of the detailed outreach and of the individuals. And so we actually reached out to over 150 churches, neighborhood businesses, and individuals. We ended up with 48 participants. And of those participants, 41 of those participants were Black. So we had a strong Black historic Albina community voice in the workshops, so that we could understand what the community is most concerned about seeing happen on the covers. And that's part of our charge. Can we go to the next one? This is just a breakout of how that group broke down, business owners, community members from various segments of the community, and then basically including the affordable folks from the affordable housing environment. And then we had 3 at-large organizations. Then in contrast to that, if we'll go to the next slide, in our online workshop, we actually, online open house, we actually had 203 individuals fill out the survey. Of those individuals, 7 of them were Black. The online open house is available to everyone during that 2-week period. Anyone can go to albinahighwaycovers.com and essentially fill out the survey. This next survey, particularly since there's been a lot of discussion already in this meeting about the base case and about the ICA cover scenarios, we will be presenting those scenarios and allowing you to comment on them. So this is a very important second work session, and a very important one for us to hear from more of the Black community about what's important to them. So what I wanted to do is just encourage each of you on the HAAB to reach out to your networks. The ODOT is actually doing a pretty robust PI campaign around the work sessions and getting the word out about the work sessions. I believe they have a toolkit for organizations that want to, do outreach, to put out the word within their organizations and their networks. So I would encourage each of you as a participant and a volunteer in this process to really help us get the word out in the Black community and get more participation from Black community members in the online open house. We only have so much room in a COVID environment. Our workshops are very intense. They're 3 hours long. We've got to cover a lot of ground, so we can't facilitate 200 people in a workshop. So we have a good cross representation of community representation in those workshops. And the way for the rest of the community to participate in our process is to go to the online open house, which will be open next Friday, not this Friday, but the next Friday on the 16th of April, and it will run through the May 3rd. And so I'm just, encouraging all of you and asking all of you to help us get the word out. So that's my update. And I thank the team for giving us a few minutes on this very busy agenda to try to encourage greater participation in our process.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gina. It is very important. So I want to echo Ms. Gina's sentiments. We would love to have you participate. I do see a very quick question, Ms. Leslie Goodlow.
Yes, Ms. Gina, is there a link or some verbiage that you could, or that has been sent? And I have to admit, I get a lot of emails, so it could be buried somewhere in my email, that we could use to post on social media, that we could put in emails out to people, a flyer, anything of that nature, so that we can get this information out. Because I understand the concern. We had similar issues when we did our housing strategy forums. We got people to come, but most of the folks that responded online were not Black or brown. So I'd like to be able to pump this up. So if there's something that you can send us so that we can spread the news, it would be most helpful to me.
Thank you so much for your comments, Leslie. And yes, we will get you something. I'll work with Erica. There is a whole package. I just don't know what the timing of when that's going out or whether that's gone out yet. And so we will check on it, and I will get you something personally before the week's out, short of that. So be looking for something from ODOT or from myself before the week.
Indeed. I want to just echo that. Yes, Leslie, I did hear from our strategic communications lead, Ms. April DeLeon Galloway. There is a notification, there is a toolkit with some sample text for social media, and I will make sure to forward that out to all of the Historic Albina Advisory Board members again, so that we can get hopefully some increased participation from our Black and Brown community members. So thank you for that. Thank you, Ms. Gina.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Natalie, thank you. Yes, I would love to. You can go on to the next slide. This is a packed meeting as always. You are going to hear from Grace Cronican and her team in regards to the peer review regarding air quality and some of the questions. We wanted to be responsive to a number of your concerns in regards to air quality. So we wanted to bring in those experts to be able to help answer those questions. Also, our architecture and engineering team has prepared for you all a outline of the explanation of the baseline. So again, to be responsive to your questions as we're meeting in one-on-ones, what really is included? What are those things that we needed to be comparing against? That team is going to make a presentation to you today as well. So moving forward, Ms. Megan, if you would do the honor of introducing our peer review panel.
Absolutely. And so, as Erica mentioned, this portion of the project update really is in direct response to a number of questions that I know you as our HAAB members have had around the project's air quality and climate change analyses. So I'm going to do a quick overview, and then I will turn it over to Grace Cronican, who was the facilitator of our environmental peer review. She's joined with her esteemed panel of experts to provide more information about that process. So we can go to the next slide and the next one. All right. So during the environmental review phase, in addition to the stakeholder outreach that we did, we also had formal coordination under the NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act process, with different cooperating and participating agencies. So these are noted specifically on the screen here. And each of these agencies had an opportunity to shape our agency coordination plan, as well as to provide feedback on the methodology. So how we were doing the technical analyses, the data, reviewing the technical reports, and also provide advanced input on the environmental assessment process. Next slide. Just as background, this timeline here summarizes the key milestones in the environmental review phase. So how did we get to where we are today? And that includes the environmental review process, or the peer review process rather. And the environmental review phase kicked off, just for background, in 2017. And then the environmental assessment was published for a 45-day public comment period in February of 2019. And then in response to stakeholder concerns, primarily around air quality, greenhouse gas, noise, the Oregon Transportation Commission directed us as the agency to conduct an environmental peer review associated with the project's environmental assessment and these specific topic areas that I just mentioned. And through that process, the peer review informed our publication of the finding of no significant impact and the revised environmental assessment, which was published in November of 2020. And this is the document that completes the environmental review process. So next slide. The environmental assessment did evaluate a range of technical topics. So I've listed these here on the slide. You can see the range from transportation, health, environmental, social, built environment. And so I wanted to just highlight here that in addition to the key points around air quality, noise, and climate change, the assessment also looked at these other potential impacts in these topic areas. And I just want to note that using really a scientific approach guided by federal and state standards, the environmental assessment found that the air quality and greenhouse gas emissions are slightly improved with the project, meaning the air will be better with the project built, and that noise would be mitigated by the construction of new sound walls, specifically with a sound wall proposed at Harriet Tubman Middle School. And these analyses, air quality, climate change, and noise were based on the traffic modeling completed for the project. And I just want to note that the traffic modeling for this project was based on regional data provided through Metro's regional travel demand model and the City of Portland's central city model. And these traffic models project the future traffic conditions based on planned and approved land use in our region, as well as other transportation projects in our region. And so we use this regionally approved data following the same traffic analysis that's done for other transportation projects within our region to conduct the analysis for the Rose Quarter project. So just wanted to make sure that you knew it was feeding into the air quality, noise, and greenhouse gas evaluation. So with that, we hired Grace and her panel to develop and lead the environmental review process. Specifically focused on, again, the air quality, noise, and greenhouse gas findings. And under Grace's leadership, we really turned to the expertise of the peer review panel of our national experts to review the findings and provide recommendations. And so with that, I will now turn it over to Grace to detail that work. So Grace, over to you.
Thank you very much, Megan. There is a slide that has the panel members on it. That I believe was number one, but I'll address this. This is really the punchline to the whole analysis that was done, and that's that air quality and greenhouse gas emissions improve slightly, and really the greenhouse gas emissions are just a determinant of the air quality as best we could tell. So they were done separately, and that the noise will increase in the area. And that with or without the project, but the two noise walls that are that the assessment said should be done, really should be done. We thought that was good. There were a few other improvements that we requested as well. Next slide. Okay, so these are the panel members, and Dr. Sung Bai is on the call today. He's had to phone in as opposed to using video. Deborah Ju is on the panel as well. Sung is our air quality expert, and Deborah is our noise expert today, but also on the panel from the Transportation Volpe Center in Boston is Andrew Ilbert. He is a noise specialist. And if you could go to the next slide. With us also is Dr. Beverly Scott. She is a transportation and community impacts specialist. She has headed up about 5 transit properties around the country from Boston and Atlanta. She's worked also in Houston and New York and has a great deal of experience. Tim Sexton is a member from Minnesota, and Tim has worked in Washington State. He's quite familiar with the Washington, Oregon situation, and he's our overall environmental expert. He manages this professionally, and he was on the panel that ODOT originally suggested we use. There were, I think, 6 or 7 panel members ODOT originally suggested, and we kept Tim because of his expertise and some of the incredible work that Minnesota State Department is doing. But the rest are all fresh faces. Dr. Charles Samoon is also a noise expert in New York City, and I'm the convener of the group. Next slide. We invited Portland Public Schools, Multnomah County, Albina Vision Trust, City of Portland, and Metro to sit in and observe everything as the project partners. And the Portland Public Schools and City of Portland Metro took us up on it. The other two, I think, were quite busy with the tasks in front of them on this and other jobs. And COVID had just hit when we started our process, so people were fairly overloaded. I appreciate the time that they did give us. Next slide. The review was, we were convened and asked questions of ODOT. We were given all of the material. We asked another round of questions. We had a meeting among ourselves. Other people sat in and watched, but to get additional questions asked, to listen to the questions that have been raised by our partner agencies. And then the panel reached a consensus, and I drafted up what they had said, and everyone edited it. So the project reflects unanimity of content from all processes. Next slide. We looked at and asked of each of the areas of air quality, noise, and greenhouse gas. We asked about the methodology. What was the process they used? Did they use the proper ones that we're aware of? And then we looked at the analysis that they made, analyzing what the conclusions were in terms of any damage that might be done. And then we looked at the mitigation that was proposed to see if it was appropriate to the analysis and what it produced. Next slide. What we would like to do, as I've already said, we looked at air quality, noise, and greenhouse gas. And I just want to say that the greenhouse gas is kind of treated a little lesser fashion because there aren't NEPA requirements for that, which I'll get to in just a minute. But as we went through these, the committee, and I think adding Bev to the panel, or having Bev on the panel, was Dr. Beverly Scott, was essential to get other considerations out on the table. And I've asked her to make that presentation today and just give a few of the suggestions we had. Next slide. So from our point of view, we found that and again, this is the punchline, that ODOT did a proper job on looking at noise and air quality in terms of the methodology that they used, in terms of the final products they recommended, the mitigation that they recommended. There were no greenhouse gas mitigations because the analysis itself was really dependent on the air quality analysis, and there aren't guidelines for people to follow yet, but we did think they did a nice job in attempting to get at the greenhouse gas issues. The peer review panel focused on a couple of areas that weren't there. We're accustomed in some documents to looking at the construction impacts up front. ODOT is going to be looking at those, but it's in a separate effort that's still to come. So we just want to alert the community, and it's a really incredibly important for you to understand that the impacts of construction in some cases can be more dramatic, if you will, than the long-term effects of the project itself. And so it's very important for this panel and for the other panels that are watching what goes on to watch ODOT as it goes through these other steps, because the noise impact of the freeway is kind of a dull roar out there if you're out on site. But when during construction, the impacts and the vibration there will be extremely obvious to everyone. So we really want one big message to pass on to you is that during construction or in preparation for construction, you really need to focus on the impacts both of air and noise and vibration. I think we've covered that. And then I'm going to have Beverly talk about some of the community impacts and what's there. The committee, every one of us is long in the tooth in a lot of ways and has been through many projects. And the scar that I-5 left on this community, though I'm the only person that's actually lived in Oregon, and I believe Tim has visited it quite a bit, it's a very familiar scar. People are accustomed to having Black community ripped apart by state highway projects. And so in terms of addressing this, we spent a lot of time trying to look at what we could do to help provide some form of reparation. And the lids are really the first thing that steps to try and weave the neighborhood back together and focusing on what can be done to provide, in a context of restorative justice, some healing to the community, we thought was incredibly important. Next slide. To the issues of air quality, I'm going to have Sung present, but I was going to have him present, but he, this time, as was last time, is on the phone. So he asked if I would give the main piece, and then he'll be here for Q&A. But one of the things that you need to understand is that Portland is in what's called transportation conformity with the state implementation plan. So in Oregon, in Portland area, our air quality is such that it's a good thing that we're in transportation conformity, but therefore ODOT does not need to do project level hotspot conformity analysis. So it's a good thing, and ODOT followed what they were supposed to, but there isn't a hotspot analysis to look at. NEPA requires its own analysis, and in this case, ODOT used the mobile source air toxic emissions assessment, and the panel was quite impressed with the use of this model. It's the latest and greatest. And so their use was appropriate, and they followed the model as they were supposed to. It was accurately done. And the results that came out on air quality, the conclusion that the air quality will be slightly better is in part because the mix of autos that are out there in the year of construction when the project is there, the mix of autos is getting better and better and better each year. And some of that is what contributes to the overall conclusion that the air quality, is going to be better. I'll leave it at that and allow Sung to provide. I do think there's one other air quality slide. Next slide. So just an affirmation here that the analysis conducted was correct and their proper conclusions were provided. They did a good job there. Next slide. With noise, I'm going to ask Deborah Jew to present this. Deborah, are you there?
Yes. Thanks, Grace. So good afternoon, everyone. So as Grace mentioned, our peer review of the noise analysis found that the methodology and the analysis itself were correct. And we provided some constructive comments regarding the sharing the information with the community. There are some aspects of it that were just difficult for a layperson to understand. And as Grace mentioned, the construction noise analysis hasn't been done, and we made various comments to for pointer or suggestions for that analysis. And I think those are on the next slide, or there's a third slide. To the third point of our peer review findings, we looked at the mitigation proposed for the Harriet Tubman Middle School and the Lilith Albina Park and the surrounding neighborhood. And the proposed malls do meet the necessary performance requirements to be feasible and reasonable. They look basically looking at how much noise reduction is provided and doesn't meet the performance requirements in terms of noise. And we had some suggestions regarding possible options to improve the performance of Wall B, possibly if it could be moved a little closer to school, maybe it would provide some better noise protection. It also would be helpful for air quality. That was something that the panel discussed. And then Soundwall 1 did not come up as a viable option, but we were wondering whether ODOT could reconsider their cost guidelines, and maybe Soundwall 1 would be would show up better in the analysis. Next slide, please. And then back to construction noise. We provide a lot of suggestions for abating the construction noise, and also some suggestions to the design of the pavement and sound walls. So on this list, some of these are not actually construction, like number 3, quiet pavement is something that relates to the overall operational noise from the improved widened roadway. And number 7 relates also to the permanent sound walls. And number 4 kind of relates both to construction and permanent sound walls. So these were lots of ideas that have worked in around the country at other projects that we we hope would be helpful for ODOT as they go to the next step of doing the construction noise. Thanks, Grace.
I want to emphasize on the noise findings before we go on to the committee that you really need to make sure ODOT has made the commitment to put in the contracts when they hire these contractors, these added requirements, whether it's for noise or for air quality. Because if you put that requirement in there, they have to provide equipment that is of caliber. In many cases, the filter gets changed or the grinder of some kind gets changed so that it's not as noisy or it doesn't have as many exhaust problems. So it's got to be, those requirements have to be put in the contracts. And I just want to say both to ODOT and to the committee, that commitment should be made up front. It's not something you can retrofit later. It's something that is very expensive. Sometimes, depends on the issue. And sometimes it's not so expensive, but you need to put that up front. And the requirements for that Deborah talked a little bit about the techniques for putting in noise blankets and things like that need to be required. And some of these references we give you are from the stuff is laid out in those requirements so that you know it's good for it. Some of them were meant for citizen involvement, community involvement, so that you know what's being required and you know what to ask for. So thank you. Next slide. I'll just note on the greenhouse gas findings that the model that was used, the committee found no problems with that, thought it was good, and particularly, and that the infrastructure carbon estimator was used was a good step toward getting information. But ODOT had no standards to follow. They're just ahead of their time in doing this work and attempting to capture some of this information. And I think at the federal level, they'll do a better job of giving a direction to all of us at some point in time. So kudos to ODOT for trying, but there's nothing that would continue away through the methodology assessment and or analysis and mitigation to sort of hang our hat on. So there's no mitigation to be proposed. Next slide. So there were many other considerations that came up, primarily related to the community in an attempt to address the inequities that have befallen this community. And I want Dr. Scott, if she would please, to walk through some of those and give you a taste for those. There's more in the report. I would encourage you to read. It's a very short report. I think it's a 10-page report. But Dr. Scott, would you lead us on that, please?
Okay, Grace, thank you very much. And to everyone, it's been an honor to be able to work on this. I'm going to, actually, I can't say a lot more than what Commissioner Simpson said when he made his opening comments. I'm going to talk pretty specifically about things that my eye as a former general manager looked at if I were looking at the project, just looking at it from a transit perspective. But I want to say a couple of things. Number one, I appreciated the transparency, went through a lot of material from prior work that the community had done in terms of saying what they really wanted to see come out of this. And it covered quite a number of years period of time. This is just following up on his comments. This is not about one project. It's really about, a major program, a major transformation in terms of where a community is moving forward. So some of the things that I talked about, I'd said things like, it would be very good to be able to look at an integrated program of projects in terms of all the different things. This is about much more than just, this is important. ODOT is a major convener, very important, but more of a kind of an integrated program of projects. The other thing I've said is this is one of those that's going to really take having the C-suite at the table. You want your technicians there, but for the kinds of commitments and really long-term things that need to take place, this is going to take that go across agencies and organizations. This is really going to take C-suite commitment. And one of the things that I referenced in my comments was around, I'm a big one on institutionalization. Personalities are real fine and dandy, but when it comes to making long-term commitments that are generational for communities, you'll hear people talk about community benefits agreements and things of that nature, which are not unique to you in the area, but I would simply say, document whatever commitments wind up taking place. And in that area, you got the full range, okay? Good jobs, business development opportunities, which have already been spoken to, housing affordability, a multitude of different environmental benefits, public arts. There are all kinds of things that ultimately can really be wrapped into this project, but then the plethora of projects, if you will, that will make for a total program. Okay, so that's kind of, that's the kind of the big bear piece. Now, let me tell you specifically, just taking my transit look at it. And I have not had any conversations with TriMet or whatever, but the bottom line is that if I just were looking, okay, you have a major commitment on bus electrification, no different than many communities around the country. And you've got those first buses are coming in, and I would be taking a look to prioritize the albino community development. That is an opportunity there. During construction, as folks have said, the devil is always in the details, and this will be a fairly extensive project. And so during construction mitigation, I would be paying attention to and have a detailed plan: transfer activity, travel and trip times, walkability, street side amenities in terms of lighting. There have been in some of the discussions things about a potential for a community shuttle. I'd get deep into that. Once again, only been I'm not at a surface level in terms of the electrification piece, but on some of that greater, that's all detail, including things like safe routes to schools, okay, that you would be looking to make sure get baked in, as well as issues relative to access and accessibility, particularly for your most vulnerable populations around things like senior centers, major community centers and things of that nature, taking it down to a real granular level in terms of how are people going to negotiate during this period of construction, which goes along with some of the other things that have been noted around construction activity. So I think I'll just kind of leave it at that. Once again, I could not say more eloquently than the way the commissioner started it, is that this is about much more. This is an extremely important catalytic leadership that's here, but that this is really a much bigger effort, if you will, than just ODOT. And oh, what a tremendous opportunity to be able to pull it all together moving forward. So,
Thank you, Dr. Scott. That was wonderful. All right, Erica, back to you for questions, or Dr. Holt, or whoever's in charge.
Indeed, I would love if there are members of the Historic Albino Advisory Board who have questions for Grace or for Dr. Scott or for Deborah in regards to the peer review, their process, questions about air quality. I know I've had conversations with several of you, so I wonder, I'll open it up for questions from the HAAB.
Jonelle looks like he has his hand up.
I missed that. Is that you, Mr. Washington? Are you trying to unmute yourself?
Bell.
No, I know how to unmute myself, but I need something to say. But you done unmuted me now, so now
I got you.
Y'all almost lullabied me to sleep for a second there, but there were some things that were really key that I thought about. First of all, where did we get a copy of the report?
I think Megan could send it electronically easily.
Yep, yeah, it's currently on the project website, but we'll make sure you get that direct link, Mr. Washington.
And I appreciate that. And the second thing is that, okay, we had a public announcement about some people suing us for something, right? And how closely related is what they're talking about, what y'all talking about?
It is related. What they're saying is that the traffic data that was provided, that ODOT provided as a basis of the analysis that they did is not accurate. We were not charged with looking at the traffic analysis original data. We were looking at the implications of the traffic data that was there. We did ask some questions of ODOT, and we got mostly the information, some of the information Megan gave us today, but and she can say it again, but in my lay terms, she used the models from the metro area. She used Metro's models, and she used the City of Portland's models, and they did their analysis. And then what we looked at is, given how much traffic was going through, that we looked at the air quality analysis that was done. And that's where our work was. And so the underlying data is what somebody's trying to challenge. The no freeway people, I think, are trying to challenge. And we looked at how that data was applied and found that it was applied appropriately. And Megan's asserting, and we just didn't verify this, that the traffic analysis was done appropriately as well.
Okay, so in the noise, in the realization of adjusting the noise from where it is to now with the covers on it, how much of an increase of noise, if there is any, that would occur in the study?
Deborah, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, you're asking me a quantitative answer.
That's what you do, isn't it, Deborah?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, well then come on, quantify.
It is, and I'm sorry, I don't have the report. I didn't open it this morning. The noise analysis is comparing existing and future levels to a number, which is 67, if FHWA noise analysis threshold. And then anything that exceeds that qualifies for the possibility of looking at whether a barrier would be effective or not. So ultimately, the recommendation for mitigation comes down to whether those barriers would be, as I mentioned,
Effective.
what effective they are. They have to be feasible and reasonable. And at the moment, they have to provide a minimum noise reduction, which varies by state. Normally it's 5 to 7, I think 5 in this case, noise reduction, which is just what that means to you is if a noise increases or decreases by about 5, you would say, oh, that I noticed that, okay? If it reduces by 10, you would say, that's like a halving, it just got half as loud, even though the energy reduces by a factor of 10, but you only notice it as a reduction of half. And then the other part is a cost factor. And building a long sound wall to benefit one house does not make any sense. So the reasonableness calculation takes a look at how many people would be would benefit from the wall, and in some cases there's also a time calculation. Like the school, the kids are not there all the time, so you have to kind of weigh that into the calculation. So the increase there is a change, but the way that noise modeling goes is that if you double the traffic by a factor of 2, if you go from 1,000 vehicles to 2,000 vehicles, you expect that noise is going to increase by 3 decibels. But if you reduce the traffic speed by a half, then you would expect that the noise would reduce by, sorry, I just put myself in the spot, by a lot, a lot more than 3 decibels. If you decrease the
Can I stop you for just a sec?
Yeah.
Just because they have other stuff to do. I just want to try an English
Right.
version of this. Here we go, layperson.
Thank you.
No.
Let me frame it before you deliver this layman's message, because I'm kind of sort of left-brained, but I am a hunter, and I know muzzle load, right? And so looking at this muzzle capacity, right, meaning that you have 2 actual entities within a small confined distance that is going to be adding change. And one of those changes is the tops, right, the covers, right? So now, and then you're adjusting the sound walls. So mitigate for me the difference between those 2 things, how you in terms of sound. So if something shoots out of a muzzle, right, because you're going to put a cover on it. So what would the sound effect different be coming after you come out of that cover and you hit that sound wall? what is the mitigating realities that is occurring within that span of understanding? I'm not a rocket scientist or
Right.
nothing, but I did understand some things.
Right. Without getting to the weeds.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Let me just, for sound in this context, we're not dealing with differences in pressure, which I think part of your muzzle and analogy is assuming, but even though we're putting a cover on the freeway, or you're all, ODOT's putting a cover on the freeway, it's, you're right that it does redirect sound, definitely. And it does redirect it towards the openings. But it, and there's some reflective properties of what's going inside. The analysis actually took a conservative approach and didn't really account for the covers in a way, you know, it didn't say, oh, the covers are there, let's just reduce everything by, 25 decibels or something. It took a very conservative, that is to say, a very small effect from the covers. And then, then you also have the portals, which has some changes. There's a lot more modeling that could be done to take a look at that, but it kind of falls outside the scope of what's normally done for an environmental analysis. To your question about, I think the question you're answering, the cover reduces noise, without a doubt. There is some effect at the portals, but even with that effect, the noise, is less. So that's the bottom line.
So my version would be there's a before and after noise. So you got what we have today, and after the project, what we would have. And then there is an impact, okay? And then ODOT suggests mitigation, and the committee affirmed that the mitigation they proposed will work, is proper mitigation, will work, and is cost effective. ODOT had 3 walls that they wanted to put up to help solve the problem. 2 of the walls are cost effective, 1 of the walls was not, and we asked them to reanalyze the one that was not to see if it could help. And then what Deborah was trying to say, just to restate the tunnel thing, they didn't take in the added benefit of the cover on some cases, and there is an added benefit to the cover. They did take into the impact it would have, the negative input, but not the positive. So it will be a little bit better than what they represent.
Thank you all for that. I want to just shift to, I see that Andrew Campbell has had his hand up for a moment. I want to take one more question for the panel.
Oh, hey, good evening, everyone. I was just curious about why the lack of quantitative data that was in the assessment. I've noticed too that was one of the areas of concern that was on the environmental assessment fact sheet. And yeah, that's all.
Andrew, I think that there was quite a bit of analysis on noise and air, but there wasn't much data to compare things with on greenhouse gas. So in as much as air is different than greenhouse gas, air quality is different than greenhouse gas, and there is some overlap. There's no federal standards to measure against. There's no, the data, when we said there wasn't much there, it's just that there's not a process already laid out for them to go through. So they did what they could. And we thought they did more than we've seen in other documents before, but that there wasn't, it's because the standards aren't there. The whole country's not used to doing this. Thank you for the question.
Indeed, thank you. I want to thank Grace and Dr. Scott and Deborah. I don't know if Song was on the line as well. I don't know if you had technical difficulties, but thank you all for joining us. I know and I appreciate your commitment to this. I know if the HAAB members, if you all have other questions, you could send them my way. I'll make sure that we're responsive to your thoughts and your questions as you may have some develop as we move along. But I just want to appreciate, Grace, you and your team for joining us tonight. Miss Natalie, if you'd put, yes, go ahead.
Erica, this is Megan. I wanted to jump back to Mr. Washington's question. I was able to pull up the technical report and the tables just to look at the difference between existing versus the project. And so the project, depending on location, Mr. Washington, in some locations, the noise is lower than existing condition with the project, and in some locations it's higher. And where it is higher, the increase is a 3 dBA increase. And so I think as Deborah Deborah, I can turn it over to you on sort of what that means, but I wanted to get that data in front of you, Mr. Washington, this evening.
Thank you very much for that, Megan. But is that data indicating that near the school, is that decibel rising or is it lowering? I
will have to follow up with you kind of on point by point. We can show you a map of the different locations and where those are. And near the school, it does vary depending on where those point locations were taken. And so I would rather share the map and that table with the full group if that's amenable to you.
There must be some impact near the school because there is a wall that we looked at that could be moved. It could help more if you moved it closer to the school. If the school district's willing to do that, it would have both noise and air quality benefits by moving that wall closer to the school. If it's on a slope, so if they can afford to give up some of that real estate, you could benefit. So I know you wouldn't have a wall there if you didn't have the impacts. Good.
Exactly.
And to my understanding, that's really where the impetus of this issue of sound and that type of thing is really where the main concern is, right? Because in the other span of that, I guess the front end of the cover, coming into that cover is not so much of a concern, but coming out of the covers and into the school section is primarily what we're actually in contention about, right? In terms of increase versus decrease. So just so that I'm understanding is that little span is what we're talking about. So when you enter it, you got one noise quality, but you enter that and it decreases, but yet you shoot out of that muzzle and then you add a certain kind of wall or whatever that is, a sound wall that you're gonna do. So what we're talking about is when you exit those cover areas and hit the school zone, that's the zone that we're talking about where the noise and fluctuation could potentially be an issue, right?
Right, and that's what we're saying is that they identified that. They've got some mitigation and you could make it even better if you moved it up. And if you go through, do some research, not you, but if ODOT do some research on some other techniques, there's things you can do to make it better than what even they're suggesting you can make it.
Thank you.
Maybe just say one thing, sorry, and sorry for not having this open in front of me. The existing noise levels are already quite high, as I think everybody acknowledges. And whether it changes, goes up or goes down slightly throughout the corridor, it is still high. So pretty much almost everywhere it qualifies for looking at a barrier, which is what the ODOT then did. And the school is actually on the border of an impact, taking into account the cover and the tunnel effect, and that is in the report, just a relatively simple analysis.
Thanks, Deborah, for jumping in there. I appreciate the conversation. Mr. Washington, thank you for your question. Hopefully we can provide those links to you and get some more of that data to you as well, Andrew. And hopefully that explanation helped you to understand why the quantitative wasn't there in regards to not having much to compare it to it. Grace, eloquently always. Dr. Scott, thank you. Deborah, for being with us. Natalie, if you would share the slides again, I would love to move into the baseline explained. We have a great presentation from our architecture and engineering team. I want to remind you all that I provided to you today at noon. As Andrew mentioned, there's an air quality one sheet, a brief description of the project history, as well as a description of the environmental assessment for you all to peruse at your leisure. Please, if you have questions in regards to those documents, to jot them down, and I will make sure that we are responsive to your requests. Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good evening, HAAB members. Thanks for having me back. Today, I will be joined by one of my colleagues named James McGrath, who is our urban design lead, to help the fun topic of the baseline explained. And we're going to do that in two parts. The first part is really in response to a question that was brought up at the last meeting. And if we can go to the next slide, please. At the last meeting, I spent some time talking about what was happening on I-5 and the different cross sections and the way in which traffic would get onto I-5, get off of I-5, work between I-405 and 84, and what these auxiliary lanes and the other things mean. Today's focus is really what's happening on top, on the surface streets, the local streets, on the highway cover, and we're going to be talking about each of those two elements, which are highlighted in yellow in the arrows. So James McGrath, who I briefly introduced, is our urban design lead. He's going to be talking about what does the existing NEPA baseline concept mean from a potential highway cover use standpoint. And so this is, I'm sure, a lot of information that's going to come your way. He has a lot of information to present. He's fantastic at talking about what this means. And I'm looking forward to handing it over to him. But before we do that, there was the question of, with this new highway cover and with this baseline project, what are the new ways in which you're going to get onto I-5? So I'm going to share that with you, give a little bit of an existing condition standpoint, and then how is the new local street system going to be serving access onto I-5? So with that, let's move right into this part. So really the setup question is, how does the street system change in the baseline concept, this NEPA concept, the environmental concept? So we're going to first look at these different directions on how to get to somewhere. In this case, the existing condition for I-5 northbound. And so before we get into it, this view is basically you're hovering above the Moda Center looking north. And so the freeway I-5 is on your right-hand side moving diagonally across. And at the very upper left, you'll see the I-5 symbol NB, which stands for northbound. And so we're going to go through a different series of routes to get to northbound access. So as you click, the first direction is on Broadway. So if you're on Broadway heading west, you would basically take a quick right onto Williams and then jump right onto I-5 northbound. The other direction, if you hit click, please, if you take Weidler, I think we all know this, you take Weidler until you get to Williams, you go north on Williams, and then you pop onto I-5. Next route is if you're coming south on Vancouver, you have to loop around a little bit, coming down onto Weidler, then Williams, and again back again on I-5, and then click again. In this case, you're going from north to south, all the way up from basically the Moda Center, up Williams, and you get onto I-5. So that's the existing condition, which we all know and love when there isn't a lot of traffic. And then if you hit the next slide, it's really how does this project transition into the new infrastructure? And so again, taking the same exact view, the blue again is the highway cover. And in this case, you're seeing the different streets that are on top of the highway cover and in and around the project. And so we'll take those same street routes. So click number 1 will be on Broadway. It looks very similar to the existing. The only difference is that you drop underneath the highway cover for a little stretch as it goes underneath Vancouver. And so this is where the highway cover acts like a little bit of a tunnel, but still you have this entry corridor that drops you onto I-5. Then click the next one on Weidler, very similar to what's out there today. Again, the only difference is just that little bit of going underneath the highway cover. The next route is Vancouver. And in this case, Vancouver and Flint are really the same. The Flint connection is being replaced with a Hancock Street extension. And so the traffic that is on Flint would actually get onto Vancouver and create this loop around to get onto I-5 northbound. So this project is pretty similar for the northbound entry. Very, very similar to what's out there today. The other direction, however, is where the change really occurred. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. And if you're coming up Moda Center, then you would come up Wheeler instead of Williams, and then you make a right on Weidler and then get back onto Williams. And as you hit click again, the reason for this is because there are some dedicated bus-only routes that are taking us up onto Williams. And this is whether it's buses getting from or coming on from Winning Way or buses coming up the side of the Moda Center. This bus-only route really helps to increase their availability, decrease travel time for buses. And so this is the one adjustment that is a strong improvement for transit and trying to make sure that those transit times are more predictable and reliable. So now we'll click over to the southbound direction. In this case, there's a little bit more of a change. We're going to take you through the same series of different movements. So as we click number 1, the first movement is Broadway. And so in this existing condition, you go west on Broadway, you come down Vancouver, you come across Wheeler, and then you get onto the freeway pretty close to the Moda Center. And that southbound location is where most of these, well, all these routes are going to get to. So we click on the next one, and it's the route for Weidler getting onto Wheeler. Next click is what happens if you come down Vancouver. And then the next click is if you come down Flint. So a whole series of different routes that are very consistent with which we all know and experience every day. So as we move to the next slide, it'll move to the baseline project and the change to go southbound. And in this case, this is one of the more significant adjustments. And if you take Broadway westward, instead of going all the way over to Vancouver, looping down Wheeler, which is shown in the red path, there's a direct connection on Williams. And this Williams, as you look at it, really consists of 2 streets. So you saw before how if you're going to head on I-5 northbound, you're on the left section of Williams. In this case, where the yellow line is, you're on the right section of Williams, creating essentially what's going to be called a contraflow. And a different graphics is going to show how this movement really happens. So this is the one direction. So if you then are going eastbound on Weidler, you would do the same thing where you extend beyond the Wheeler street and then go directly onto the on-ramp that drops you directly into the freeway. And the next movement is if you're on Vancouver, this is where you come down across Vancouver, make a left onto Weidler, and then drop directly onto the access ramp onto the freeway itself. So when you put these 2 movements together, you have this contraflow. And so the William Street contraflow is this term that you'll hear over time. And so today's introduction of what this really means. So if you start with where the dots are, that's your starting point. Your arrows at the end are your ending points. And what you notice is those 2 lines, the yellow and the red, never intersect. And that's really important for this change in operations that's going to be out here. By avoiding these crossover points, you avoid a lot of mixing between modes, mixing between vehicles, pauses, transit impacts, bicycle, pedestrian conflicts, each of these different things. And so this contraflow really works in a way to separate these different travel patterns to optimize the system, to help improve the system. And on the next slide, you can really see where these points are. Each of these red blotches indicates some form of significant conflict that exists today that creates partially the delays that you see, partially the congestion that you see. And so by removing, if you click on the next slide, please, by removing some of the vehicles, whether it's 300 or 400 cars at the street for Vancouver on the left, 500 or 600 cars that are traversing on Broadway itself through Williams, and this north-south bicycle route that runs right through the middle of it, you can avoid a lot of the conflicts, create a safer space, and frankly, improve operations overall. So this is the hallmark of what is happening with the local streets. And it took, 75 different options that were studied and analyzed and looked at to realize that this one is really the best of all worlds, the sort of the optimized solution, the balanced trade-off across all the different modes. And this is at the hallmark of our project from the baseline standpoint. So there's a lot more detail that's going to come over time, but we at least wanted to introduce this question or introduce this discussion and respond to the question that came up at the last meeting about how exactly is the project going to be getting onto I-5? So is this adjustment as it's shown? So with that, the question is, what kind of space remains for development? And this is what's really, really important. So on that last picture, you saw some graphics of blue. And so with this, I'm going to hand it over to James McGrath, again, our urban design lead. He and Bill Hart worked together hand in glove to come up with the different concepts and really explore the technical feasibility that comes from what can you do to potentially build something on top of these highway cover spaces. And again, this is, I'll do another plug on behalf of Gina. With this context of what the baseline is, please reach out and go to those highway cover assessment workshops and use this as a starting point to see how other options could morph off of these. Keeping in mind that, yeah, well, might be the NEPA baseline, and this is what the EA has embedded into it. There could be other options that unfold. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to James to show you some really awesome slides of what could be, even based on this baseline cover idea.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for having me to all the HAAB members. I'm the Urban Design Task Lead, and what that means to me is I'm responsible for trying to integrate the infrastructure project with the people places, make those two things work together. We embarked on some technical work to understand the issues of open spaces and buildings on the covers in anticipation of the recommendations and the outcomes that would come from the independent covers assessment. So these are technical explorations meant to help us get calibrated and get ready to deliver the goods when decisions get made, to set the table through the infrastructure project for the complementary action that might occur based on the visions and the outcomes of the independent covers assessment. So the work that I'm presenting today is by no means a recommendation or a decision. So with that, as a preamble, I'll jump in. Continuing on the before and after, on the left is the existing condition that you know and understand so well today. On the right is a plan depiction of the extent of the cover in turquoise and three key sites that we identified in that expanse that we'll be discussing in some detail. And I think you can go ahead and click. North, as always, is up. If there's anything in terms of orientation, I will do my best. The extent of the cover has changed over time, and certainly since the project started to this snapshot in this moment in time, it is one contiguous cover. It's spread its wings a little bit to the north and the south. So next slide. There are a number, because of the complexities of the geometry, right? We have an urban grid, the north, south, east, west grid of the majority of Portland and inner Portland, intersecting with the geometry of the freeway, which follows its own logic. There is complexity in the space. The covers have to do the work of holding up the local streets and to reconnect that grid. And the result is some complex shapes, a lot of triangles. Which is really the origin of the three main sites. By the time the large cover is broken up and doing all of the transportation work for bicycles, and pedestrians, and transit, and vehicles, there are really just three sites that we identified and studied that are at a scale that makes sense, particularly for buildings, but also for really programmed open spaces. Keep going. Here's another depiction of that, oriented in a more three-dimensional way, just to say these are the sites that we explored on structure, on covers, on bridges at various scales. We'll get into that. And you can see them in their context, the relative scale of these developments in comparison to buildings you know that are adjacent. So there are sites that we'll talk about that are on covers. Next slide. There are also sites directly adjacent to the cover, immediately adjacent to the covers that I'll also touch on. And again, this is initial exploration, not decisions. We're trying to get some facts on the table and get ourselves prepared for what might come out of the ICA process. Keep going. So we looked at three big questions. What are the potential uses we should get prepared for? And we looked at open spaces, but we also looked at public buildings. Next slide. We also were looking at what was the appropriate shape. When we inherited the design of the project, there were particular shapes for the covers. What we were allowed to do was explore what are some different shapes that might create more opportunity or provide for more opportunity. So we really didn't look backwards at the previous shapes. We really looked forward trying to maximize what the cover system could do. And then the last thing we looked at was what's the scale? What can we hold up? What can we accommodate? Again, not decisions, just an exploration about what can the baseline do? What can we do with the structures and the footprint that we have in our NEPA clearance? So we looked at 1- and 2-story buildings, and we looked at 3- and 5-story buildings as a range to do some technical work. And that's really what this is. Keep going. So I want to share with you, I'm going to sort of go to the end and come back. We'll definitely talk about some of the design options, but because those design options are really just confections of our designers without the benefit of talking to you, right? We had to do this without the benefit of a lot of public process. I want to talk to you about some of the assumptions we made and some of the high-level takeaways. So the first thing that we noticed is that the cover is big, but the developable areas, and this is specific to buildings, are smaller than the extent of the covers. First of all, the covers have to do work for the local streets. They have to hold up those local streets. But there's also some structural rules and logics that we assumed, we didn't decide for the project, but we assumed that no building should both be on a bridge and also on land adjacent to the bridge. In other words, no building, no development should span the gap. And there's lots of reasons, and we can dive into those reasons. But what this means is that this is the origin of there are 3 main sites that we wanted to look at, and then there's some other fragments of space that we think have promise for other and complementary uses. Next slide. The other thing, some other rules that we thought prudent and that we wanted to follow were not only do local roads take up space on the covers and you have to avoid the joints, but there are some other things around access and maintenance. There are also some concerns around fire and life safety. And these concerns told us that we should set back from the edges, that we should be aware of the edge conditions and allow for travel ways and maintenance ways and inspection, site access that further constrained or limited or started to box in the area for vertical development. It's easier to accommodate those offsets and those maintenance walkways or driveways in a landscape and open space situation, but you'll see their consequence rendered when we get into buildings. Next one. The other really important thing is that what's happening down below really does matter to what can happen up above. We have been talking, and I think it's understandable that we have a number of northbound lanes, that we have to have a clear span. We have a number of southbound lanes. So we essentially have these 2 barrels underneath us. But as we migrate to the north end of the project, because of the ramp geometry, the bridges have to change. They're longer bridges. They have to span further. So there's some structural complexity underneath. And it really does have a relationship to what can happen up above. There are some rules that emerge or assumptions that we made about how these 2 things relate. Even though you don't see it, it actually has consequences for where you might put a building foundation or where you might put a building edge. In short, the heavier the objects on the cover, the deeper the structure is needed to hold it up. That's fairly common sense. So the bigger the stuff, the bigger the bridge. And what we know and what we found out is that we can push the highway down a bit, about a foot, to accommodate some of that increase. If the bridge has to get wider, the bridge that holds up the cover, it has to get thicker. We can push the roadway, the highway down about a foot. But if that won't do it and we need more structure to hold up big things, what winds up happening is the whole surface kind of has to lift up. We still need that hole in the sky for the freeway, and then we need a thicker bridge. So what it means is that the surface of the covers have to lift up, and that can be problematic when we're trying to stitch these streets and these places back into the existing condition. So it's a balance point, and we were trying to find that balance point. I'm not saying we found it perfectly. There's many creative solutions that can occur, but it's important for you to understand that relationship. Next one. The other thing is, for buildings in particular, buildings need utilities. They need wet utilities. They need technological utilities, and sometimes they need vertical circulation systems. If it's a multi-story building, it's going to need an elevator. And so we wanted to be honest with ourselves and explore what does it take to serve a building on structure. And it's complicated, not just because each of these buildings are going to need essentially a crawl space between the top of the bridge and the ground floor. That will change the relationship, or has the potential to change the relationship of the building to the sidewalk adjacent. And there, we care about these things in Portland. There are rules around how buildings have to behave next to the street. But this is somewhat uncharted territory for us, how all of these systems will get into and out of the building. And so it's important to recognize that we're going to have to stuff some things in, and not all of those things can be below the bridge deck and in between the bridge deck and the highway below. So we're thinking there's some sort of utility space that will change the relationship of the building to its context. Next. Next slide, please. Now, the other thing to mention is that I had pointed to there's 3 main sites, but there are also complementary sites, sites that might be impacted by the project or acquired by the project that are off cover. And it's, we explored what are the possibilities of those sites. Those sites are generally governed by the existing zoning because they are currently private property. They're governed by height and bulk and all sorts of types of uses. But in a lot of cases, they're directly adjacent. And we believe there's a really fruitful relationship that can occur between a development that's off structure, a more commonplace structural solution, a building solution, but that we could blur the boundary between that and the on-covers things. This happens to be right in the middle of the project where there's a potential development site that is off structure, but perhaps the parking lot or the plaza environment that serves that building and complements that building can happen on the covers. So it's an important thing to note that the covers provide opportunity to stitch these places together in ways that aren't exclusively about building buildings. Next slide. Okay, so those are some takeaways, lots to talk about. We're excited. We're really excited to get the Q&A. But before we do, I wanted to share with you just some images of the work that we did and explore and depict some of the trade-offs and consequences. So the first is, again, without the benefit of talking really to the community in a deep way or talking to you, we created a propositional, what if the covers were used for public realm, for open spaces, for parks, for play spaces? And this is, it's just an idea so that we could explore technical issues around, could we plant trees? Where could we plant trees? Could we have a water feature? What would it take to get a level playing field? The truth is, the covers provide, the baseline concept provides a really strong platform for lots of open space and landscape solutions. We looked at the cover extents that were shorter and tighter. We looked at the cover extents that were expanded. The truth is we have lots of flexibility with open space. And it's also important to note that even if we were to put buildings on these, a lot of the other space around that is still going to be on the covers will need to accommodate landscape. And so the ideas and the lessons learned here will apply to whatever the future solution is. Next slide. The covers, even if you piled a bunch of dirt on those covers so you get the right amount of soil volume to plant trees, which we'll have to do, this is a relatively thin crust. So it means that the open space solutions are very easy to stitch back into the adjacent streets and communities and places. And there's not a structural premium to do so. We can fit open space solutions and creative ideas clearly and easily within the baseline. That's really the point. The more complex options, next slides, will come when we start talking about buildings. So keep going. The next slide will go from north to south. This is a depiction of how landscape and buildings might work together. You can see that there's a building that is north of Hancock. And you'll also note that, you know, the project's geometry changes. Hancock is in flux. So the site north of Hancock is also in flux. But the premier site that we imagined was in the middle site because it was the largest site. And there's a relatively small site at the south that we'll get into. But let's go dive into that north site. I don't want to talk really about assumptions about what's in the building or whatnot. We were looking at what's the right footprint, what's a reasonable footprint. This is where Bill Hart and his team really shines. They do architecture in Portland of all sorts all the time. And so they helped us scheme these buildings as well as the access that is required for a lot of these buildings. Here's an example of where you can see that we've left a drive aisle between the edge of the cover. We've set that building back. We've made that space do double duty, landscape buffer, drive aisle, but also pushes the edge of the building away from the edge of the structure. And we, because of the length of spans, next slide, because of the length of spans up here on the north cover, we think a one-story building is feasible. Lots more design has to be done. A two-story building at the north cover is feasible, but we're going to have to get into way more detail. And we think that in the baseline context, anything taller than 2 stories really doesn't make sense or is not accommodatable, if that's even a word. 3 stories is unlikely on the north cover. Let's jump to the middle site. On the middle site, we looked at a range of uses. This is really the signature site. It's both the largest site at scale, but it also has sort of what I would call a civic address. It's on Broadway, but it's also visible from Vancouver and Williams. So it's sort of right in the heart of the area. And it could be residential, it could be commercial. This site, I think, has a lot of flexibility. Next slide will show you that this is also the place where we think 2 stories is accommodatable, again, within the baseline. A 3rd story is probable, if not likely. And then when we get into the stories that are above that, 4 and 5, it's really a stretch to fit that into the existing project, into the existing baseline. Remember, the taller it gets, the deeper the structure gets. We can only push the surface of the highway below down a certain amount. So anything that gets bigger, we have to lift up that street, and then we got to sweeten it back and tie it back into the adjacent streets. So it's getting challenging when we're in that 4 to 5 zone, or 4 to 5 stories in the middle zone. Next slide. South site presents some unique and perhaps different constraints. It may be hard to see in this graphic, but the south site is sort of landlocked. It's between 2 ramps, so you can't turn off a ramp and get into a driveway. So it's really, its only frontage and access is on Weidler itself, and that constrains it. Either we have to circulate around the building, and we're thinking for things like trash and recycling and other kind of building services, or those things are foisted out onto the street. But that street is doing a lot of work. There's pedestrians, there's a cycle facility, there's a bus stop, and then there's the through lanes. So this one is constrained by the geometry of the ramps and the geometry of the street. And that is really the limiting factor. The structural system that underpins this site is the same as the middle site, meaning you could go a little bit bigger. But what constrains this, and what in our estimation constrained the opportunity, was it's sort of hemmed in. So this is a relatively small building. Next slide. You could do a multi-story building here, 1 story or 2 stories. But in fact, it's the site geometry that limits it. But there again, those assumptions and those things can be challenged. So I think that's my last slide. Can we advance the slide, or am I 1 slide behind?
I'm not sure. Are we having some technical difficulties there, Natalie? Unable to advance the slides? Perfect. While we just have a few moments, I want to give an opportunity. Thanks, Steve and James. I want to give an opportunity for HAAB members to ask questions from the A&E team. Is there anyone who has specific questions? Again, of course, we're always open to forwarding your comments and hopefully being responsive to those things that you have questions about, but wanted to take a moment to give an opportunity if you all have anything pressing at this moment.
No, I'm sorry to be the one to talk on this one, but I'm pretty
excited. It's okay.
Well, he must have heard me the last time he left away from around here. I am really excited about seeing what you guys brought back. For the first time, I sort of got my hands around what this real project looks like. you know, and I do appreciate that from y'all. I mean, y'all did a really good job of laying that out to where it doesn't seem like it hit this or it impeded that, or it was so you showed me a few things that were really excited. And so I want to thank you for that, because you sort of clearly defined what those tops and the capacities and all those things. So, so now I feel really informed about what this project really looks like, potentially could look like. You know, so there was just one of the things that I might have had a little bit of an objection about, but the fact that these covers can carry buildings and structures and those types of things, I think that that's the target for where we're trying to get to, at least in my book. And the other part was the reason why I did not support the park part of this, and so that you get this real clear, y'all, so that I don't mix my messages. To me, the park concept in this reality here just seems to add to the gentrification. Okay, if it, you know, where I went to school at, which was Ivy League school, urban studies, community development simply mean Black people removal. Okay, and it's real clear to me that when you continue the projects that you already got going on Williams and Vancouver, if you played into that park concept, all you would have done is to add convenience to that sense of direction in which we're going, and that is a gentrified direction. Okay, so the park concept, the mixed use concept, I really appreciated that. I think that there's some potential in that model. It adds an opportunity for some upside in the real estate reality of this space for us to get some new constructs and concepts and all that back in it. And then it adds some of that outdoorsy kind of natural air quality type of thing that we were really actually looking for as a healthier neighborhood and healthier opportunities for our community. The one last thing was that, which popped into my mind about it too, was that when we were earlier speaking about air quality, and that air quality in this situation around those buildings are going to be somehow or another mitigated and really has to be really looked at in the potential for what that actually looks like. Because the way you got all those ramps and how you're redirecting on all that, you're going to build a higher density of traffic movement in about and around those buildings. So, so there was just a little bit concern for me about that. And so in understanding that, and when you see Bill, you tell Bill, I appreciate some of the constructs in which he added to that reality. I think that it adds a little bit. So y'all got a good positive strike from me today, but you know, just keep up the good work and keep it moving in the right direction. But I think that whole structural, whole load bearing tops and how you had it all laid out and the redirection of the traffic, you know, Broadway was where my real concern was for our district at least. And so, you know, how much interruption and how much traffic and stuff are going to mitigate our business sector in that area and all that sort of is a little bit of a concern to me. But I like where you guys are headed with this part of it. Thank you for allowing me some reprieve so I didn't have to work so damn hard to get to what it was that I'm sitting here to help y'all get to, you know. So with that said, I appreciate you, all right?
Thank you, Mr. Washington. I always could look to you. Yeah, Steve and James and the A&E team, as I've mentioned to you outside of this venue, thank you for your work. I think it's important for the community to know what's included so they know how to make a great informed decision. With that, Historic Albina Advisory Board members, if you have other thoughts or questions, I know you're thinking of them. I know in our one-on-ones, there'll be an opportunity for us to continue to dialogue around this presentation. As well, you can send me your messages, emails, so that we can elevate that up to the team and to leadership to be responsive. With that, I'm going to move further into our meeting. I want to be conscious of your time. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Jessica Stanton. She was tasked with helping us to redevelop the branding in line with the values of this project. So Ms. Jessica, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Erica. Good evening, board members. It's wonderful to see you all. Just one moment. It looks like my screen sharing is okay. Sorry about that. Can you all see my screen? Okay, great. So I just want to take a moment to look at this quote from former Senator Avell Gordley. We are here, we were here, and still are here. I want to thank the Gordley family for the contributions they've made to this project and this process. But I think the reason we're featuring this quote is that we think it really captures the essence of this project. You know, what's important, that this is about a community that is here, that continues to be here and will still be here. Even if we're not physically together, it's a community that is here, and it is all this quote captures that. So this is our agenda. We want to talk about why there was a rebrand, our process, top takeaways, where we are now. But the most important thing is, where are we going? And what is that? What does the new brand look like? And what is your decision about that new brand? So ODOT and the project team decided to rebrand the project last year with the understanding. They identified the need to rebrand the project. The current project branding was created during the prior environmental planning phase, and it no longer fits the present project emphasis on restorative justice and equity for Black Portlanders. The shift in this focus is engaging the Black community. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm just having a moment here. So, as you know, the project shifted to focus on restorative justice and equity for Black Portlanders and the historic Albina community. So with this shift, you really needed a new identity to reflect the new project values and to also accept that you might be a part of the community discourse for many years to come. So what does that new brand need to look like? What does it need to say? What does it need to be? The purpose of the whole new brand is for the community and historic Albina Advisory Board members to be profiled and to be a part of this
Profiled.
project.
Holy shit.
Oops. Sorry about that. I don't mean profiled. Please forgive me for that. That was a mistake. So let's just talk quickly about what our process was. Our process is to put the community vision forward. It's to raise up what your values are, what your ideas are, what you think that this project needs to be. So as I've mentioned before, our process involves, it's a branding process. We start with discovery, we move to conceptualization, and then we do design and implementation. So let's just talk a little bit about what we discovered. Like, what was the first part of our process? We spent the past 3 months engaged in one-on-one conversations with up to 23 stakeholders. And some of those conversations were recurring. Those were community members, they were board members, and a select group of project team members. We also attended the independent cover assessment community workshops that were held in February. We got to hear from we went to both of the workshops, and we got to hear from community members what their vision is about the covers and what their ideals are, what their values are for what Albina means today and what it means going forward. We also held a youth focus group in March, and we got to hear from young students what their ideas are about Albina today and about historic Albina and about urban renewal and how they really want to be a part of this process. The interesting thing about the youth is that they really sounded like you, board members. We really enjoyed talking to them and listening to them to hear what their values are and how we should influence this brand going forward. So our process ends up being creating a vision of your brand, of the community, what this project is. So we create a vision summary, and that is the vision that we use to guide the design going forward. So let's talk about what our top takeaways were. I love this quote. Honor the memories of people, the sacrifices they made for progress, for the community, to inspire us to build better in the present and future. This quote is about remembrance and our opportunity to build something better. And I think that really talks about a lot of the takeaways and a lot of what we heard from community members as we talk to people about this brand. So more about what the top takeaways were. Albina was a flourishing culture of families, beautiful lives, Black-owned businesses. It was an oasis, a place where where Black lives were normal and uninterrupted. It was a great place to grow up, and it was a place that was safe. It was their place and something that they owned. This is also a historic brand. Obviously, there are real factual events that we understand that help shape and impact what the brand is. This is a personal brand. This is about people with historic influences. There are individuals and family stories that are interwoven into what happened to Albina and what can happen to Albina. This is a brand about community events and experiences of inequity, displacement, redlining, disinvestment, and unwelcoming. This is also about the longstanding tension between urban development and community well-being. So we heard so much about the facts of what happened to Albina. And I think, I'm not going to go into the detail of what those facts are, but the point is to see this orbit, this swirl of events that have happened to Albina and to the community members, to know that these events, they may have happened a long time ago. The Memorial Coliseum was built in the 50s. The Vanport flood was in 1948. Legacy Emmanuel Hospital was in 1970. The Great Migration was in 1940. These events live large in the community and the people that we talk to. It doesn't matter how long ago it was. It matters that it happened and it still is impacting the community and individuals. So I think it's really important to understand this swirl of events and how there's an orbit of activity that influence this brand. But what I want you to take a look at is in the center of the slide, we're showing a nexus between the I-5 Rose Quarter project and Albina. What is that nexus? And there's something happening in the center. There are all these events that happened, but there's something happening in the center that's something we think is really special. We're not sure what it is, but something is building in the center, and we think that all of these events have culminated in the project today. So this is what we heard, more takeaways about what Albina is and what the stories were shared with us from community stakeholders. Albina is abundance. One of the stakeholders, when I asked her, what are your stories about Albina? What would you like to share with me about Albina? The first thing she said is abundance. It was an abundant life. It was a great life. I loved going to school. I shared time with my family, neighborhood. It was an abundant life. It was a rich life. And I want you to know that too many times our story starts with a deficit, but Albina was not that. It was abundant. Other stakeholders talked about reclamation. I want to reclaim what was lost. Businesses, homes, twice to our family. Other stakeholders talked about the need and the desire and the goal for wealth creation. And other stakeholders said, we want a 100-year legacy. We want a legacy. We want to claim that. And then other stakeholders talked about different things, the transitions that occurred in Albina, the celebration of jazz and music. There's a strong, rich culture that exists in Albina. And then the sense of home and family, Black-owned businesses, and then the desire for climate justice and the arts. All of these things are still current, but those were also things that have come from the past. So this is kind of the top level takeaways of what we heard about Albina. And then this is, I'm not going to go through every detail, but this is just to spark your memory about some of the joyful existence of the past and the current and what Albina is. Albina is family and community and home. And more ideas about the families and the communities and the homes. Here's pictures of Dean's Beauty Salon and Barbershop, still there. More stories. This is Pastor Probrasco's grandmother, Rosa Marie Searcy. She had 12 children and she was here, this is a picture from the 1920s. More of her stories. This is the Afro-American Heritage Bicentennial Commemorative Quilt. This is a contribution of 15 community members that created this quilt. And this is a picture that the Jackson Love family shared with us. More about our voices. Activism has been a huge part of the albino story, and it continues to be. More about our voices. Our art and our culture. This is so rich. So let's talk about where we are now with the brand. This is the current brand. It's a good brand for a transportation project. This is the icon, and then this is the name. And just to remind ourselves, the name is not going to change, but this is the current brand. This is where we are now. So where do we want to go? I think this quote really captures that. All hands on deck. This is a generational opportunity. At some point, the question is, what is it that we want to leave behind? Let's ask ourselves that question. So where are we going? We're creating a brand that acknowledges the project values and honors historic Albina and Black Portlanders. We want to open doors, continue to open doors for restorative justice. I think that restorative justice is occurring. This community has led those efforts in restorative justice for decades. Discover the nexus between historic Albina and the project. And we want to connect the vision of the community of stakeholders to this project. That's where we're going. So this next, before I move into what identities and what brands, what direction we came up with the brands, I just want to pause for a moment and say that, so where are we going? We're trying to create a brand that captures all of that we just talked about, captures what you already know, what you're working on, what you've been doing as board members. What's the brand look like? What does it need to be? So we've had some design processes. We've had conversations with stakeholders and tried to narrow it down to about 2 directions. So one direction is split. We've got an option, and then we have another direction. So there's 2 directions. Let's take a look at the first direction. So back to the quote, we are here, we were here, and we still are here. We think this quote captures this first direction. So this is the I-5 Rose Quarter Albina North Star. This is the typography, and you can see that it's modular. It can be horizontal, it can go vertical. And then this is this beautiful element that this is the North Star. The identity story is inspired by the idea that honoring the historic Albina community will be the guiding star for the success of the project. We use the reach of the project to honor the vital past of this community, to remember their contributions, and to build a better future with Albina as our North Star. So this is the North Star. And this is actually, we're calling this the heritage icon. I'm going to move to the next page. This is exemplary of how this could be laid out. Might be a brochure cover, might be a report cover, but this icon in particular is actually a part of this is the heritage icon, and what it is it's based on the Hill Block building. So if you look at the building, this is supposed to resemble the architecture of the Hill Block building, the cupola, and even maybe some of the windows. So this is the Albina North Star with a cultural piece that we're the Hill Block building. And this is it in a banner. And you can see that this can actually grow to be a semicircle and larger, and it can move around. So this is our option 1, Albina North Star. For our second direction, future generations, we're initiating something totally new. Seeing things that we overlooked before, we're including the people going forward so that everybody gets it moving forward. So this is another take on the Albina North Star, but we're calling this one Albina Rising. So it's symbolic, it's a connection to the West African heritage by using the Adinkra symbols. The literal meaning of these symbols, I don't know if you can see, but this is justice. This is the Sankofa, revival and remembrance. And this is abundance. So the story here is that this is the connection and revival of Albina will inspire the identity. The Adinkra symbols represent the Albina star rising out of this project. The individual characteristics of Sankofa, which is revival and remembrance, abundance and justice, is a call on the community to fulfill these aspirations. Together, Albina Rising, Albina Rising is the community rising to reach our greater potential. And this is one layout with abundance. And then this is also what a brochure could look like with using, here's the symbol for justice, here's abundance, and here's Sankofa. So this one you can think of as a kit of parts. And then I'll move on. And then this is a banner with abundance. And then I'll move, this is the last one. See ourselves in the place we live. So this one we're calling Bloom. This is the blossoming, this is symbolic of the blossoming of a revitalized Albina. So the bloom symbolizes the blossoming of a revitalized historic Albina to inspire community connectivity and outcomes with the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project. So you can see there's two directions here. There's the red bloom, and these are the symbols. This is the symbol of abundance. And then there's the black flower bloom. And then here's another application. And then here's another application. So can we talk about these, Erica, or what would you like to, how do we?
Indeed. What I'd love to do, Jessica, thank you so much for all of your just commitment to trying to infuse the values into this branding process. I can feel and hear your heart in this. So I appreciate all of your efforts, you and Albert, in taking all of that feedback into this design. I want to give the opportunity for historic Albina Advisory Board members who are on the call with us tonight to give their maybe their top choice in regards to direction to be able to follow. So I want to preface with we have several members who have illnesses and other issues that cause them to miss tonight, but I would like to move forward if we can with those who are in the room to help us identify the branding that most relates to them, to the project values and moving this forward. I'll let Mr. Clark give me just one moment. So I will ask you all to give me your thoughts, one or two. The North Star, am I correct? And the other option is Bloom. And keep in mind that if we need to have further conversation in regards to one of the designs, there might be opportunity to do that, but we want to have a direction for Jessica and her team to be able to move forward with. So I'll start with your question, Mr. Clark.
Well, it's more like more of a comment. I really like the direction of Bloom rather than the North Star. The North Star, the meaning and the words and everything that you're saying are great, but I feel like it's too busy. I think that everything will just it'll get lost, you know? So when I look at a brand and a mark and how you can use it multiple ways, you can see the simplicity more so in Bloom. And I think we can, you know, dive deeper into that later, but I think that's the direction I'm going in.
Beautiful. I appreciate that. Thank you. One vote for Bloom. I'm going to go next to Andrew Campbell.
Oh, hey, yeah, I agree what Mr. Clark mentioned about the Bloom image. It is more a little appealing. It's not as busy, and then also it may yeah it's a good visual, especially you know, with the more of the afro and things upon that. It's kind of like a more of a, yeah, it just connects with just Black culture a little more. But I do like the North Star and the connection of the Tinker's symbols, though. So,
If you
yeah,
had to decide, would you lean more towards North Star or Bloom?
Bloom.
Perfect. Thank you. I'd like to move on. I believe Mr. Washington is still with us.
Yeah, I think the Bloom is nice. I think that you should add some color to that whiteness that's in it, you know, because I know some sisters probably sitting here thinking about what they're thinking about. I'm sorry, I did some beacon, you know, but you might want to shade that, put a little shade of some kind of color in there. You know what I say? Respect, no problem. I enjoy that part of it. I appreciate you adding the male to that flower too, because it sort of added that dimension when we were discussing it the last time. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Washington. Pastor Richard Probasco.
The Bloom. The Bloom was red. It makes a statement. It's easy to identify with as far as that's concerned. It has some excitement to it. I think the red just sets it off, captures attention. That's what we want.
Thank you. Miss Leslie Goodlow, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still here, and I'm working still, so I didn't get a chance to see the second visuals, so I can't give an answer at this point. So it sounded good from what I could hear, but I wasn't able to see them.
No worries. I'm going to have Miss Jessica put it back up. You can take a quick look, and I'll shift to Mr. Carlos Richard. Dr. Richard.
Really? That's what how you right now?
So this is Bloom.
I'll let her take it in for a while. Dr. Richard, are you still with us? I don't get a response.
I'll go back to North Star. This is North Star. With the cultural heritage star. And this is Albina Rising with the Adinkra symbols. And this was a kit of parts, and it would only be one symbol at a time with the brand, or with, I'm sorry, with the name.
Okay, so I liked the in the North Star, like the reference to the hill block.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's an appropriate reference. I do like the red on the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So I am torn. I don't know, maybe if you could change the color scheme in this first one, that might make it different. It might make it pop a little bit more other than that blue. So that's my thoughts. I looking at it on my phone, I'm not on my computer, so I'm trying to make it large enough that I can read it or see it.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for weighing in. I want to make sure that if Dr. Richard is still with us, that I get his weigh in. Hearing nothing. Based on what I've heard today, Jessica, I think the group would like to move forward with further developing the Bloom logo. And that's the direction that we should head in. I wonder if we can connect post and if there is further interest in others adding, as Mr. Washington's comments, to highlighting some other areas in the branding, that there's an opportunity to do so.
We'd love to do that, Erica. However it works for the board members and yourself, we'd love to connect, yes. But so we should head towards Bloom, you think?
That is what I'm hearing from this group, based on all the responses we received. So yes, thank you, Jessica. Albert, thank you for your work. Thank you for being responsive. I know this has been a quick but tedious process, involved all of your interviewing, all of your time spent getting to know the people of Albina. So I appreciate all the work that you've put into it. Miss Natalie, if you could share the slides for me.
Absolutely. Apologies for the interruption there.
No worries. I understand some of us are having some connection issues, but most of us should be used to that after a year of this COVID reality. So no apology necessary.
Thank you very much. Here's where I was when I got kicked out. Do we need to advance past this way?
Yes, please advance. We are well past.
Oh, well past this.
Yes, ma'am. Perfect. Here we are. This has been a long evening. We've had some great conversation, and I want to give members of the community, as well as the Historic Albina Advisory Board, a brief synopsis of where we're moving forward. Please continue to keep in your mind the independent cover assessment work. Those online open houses will be beginning in the next week, and we need your help in making sure that members of the Historic Albina community, those Black and Brown Portland folks, have an opportunity to let their voices be heard in regards to what is their vision for what could happen in this process. We will be working with Jessica and her team to finalize the project branding. And we will take a look again with Steve Drahota, James and his team. They'll be bringing to you some more information in regards to the local streets. We'll have some updates in regards to early work packages and a presentation on what performance measures would look like in regards to the outcomes of the project values. So we want to update you. Our next meeting together, next slide, Miss Natalie. Yeah, those are great dates. So again, I'll reiterate, independent cover assessment workshop is going to be April 15th and 17th. And the online open house, we will need your help to putting the word out there into the community. Our next meeting together will be on April 20th. That's a slight change. It should be in your calendar invitation. And in that meeting, you will be having a mini workshop from the independent cover assessment team to take you through the same thing that our community stakeholders will be experiencing. Dr. Holt, I would love for you to share a closing thought with us as we wrap up this evening's meeting.
Absolutely, great work tonight. Quite a bit of material covered, and I don't think I've mentioned this before, but it's worthwhile to go back and review the meeting. You can go back, catch it online, and fast forward, rewind, pause, because moments like this is kind of a fire hydrant where you're getting thoroughly wet, but who knows how much you're retaining, right? So you might want to go back and check it out. Also, you can always reach out to Erica, myself, or Megan and ask any questions and further the conversation. It is so important what we're doing, and it is so significant. We've got the opportunity to participate in shifting generational impact, and we appreciate your effort and your energy as you're involved in this process. My closing thought would be this: just as the spring is upon us and life is beginning to blossom and people are heading back outside, it's a great opportunity for us to think about how we are blossoming in this space and bringing the best of ourselves to this place to make lasting difference. Thanks so much for your effort, your energy, and your time. Have an excellent night. Stay safe, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Good night, all.